international port built so that proper ships and stuff could land there. They'd also give them an airport near East Jerusalem, which would be their capital city. They would give them huge amounts of economic development aid. And they would have a high-speed train connecting Gaza to the West Bank, which is something I foresaw and said years before it was in the Trump plan. That's obviously got to be done. So, you know, and I made a detailed comment. I published a critique of this plan in the Kantian sense of a commentary on it, in which I suggested, you know, this bit's good, this bit's bad, this bit is ridiculous, throw it out, this bit needs working on. I did a whole line-by-line analysis of it. And so I just hope, I mean, if only Middle Eastern countries had paid attention to that plan way back then, we wouldn't be where we are now. We'd have a flourishing Palestinian community in Gaza and elsewhere, living in harmony and peace with Israel. So I know it's kind of late in the day, but something like that plan needs to be revived, and I believe Trump will try again with that. You know, and this time they have to rebuild Gaza as part of it. It's just such a tragedy, the whole situation. But so anyway, that's another good thing I'm looking to Trump to try and advance, and I believe he'll try and work on the Ukraine-Russia war as well and getting a ceasefire there. Although how that can be done without huge disappointments is you know, it's going to be a hell of a challenge. Right. Sorry, that was inspired by your talking about French microbes and virus research, because, you know, Kennedy and the whole origins of COVID thing hinges on this knowledge of viruses and stuff. So it's really interesting. Okay, well, I think I'll just say that in our meeting for the Institute and the World Intellectual Forum, we discussed the Summit of the Future, which took place in New York, and a friend from Kenya who attended spoke about that. We hope he'll report back more next time. And also we talked about the Lex Innocentium, the Irish peace proposal that's come out of Sean English, saying basically that modern warfare can no longer be regarded as a just war, because it never differentiates between the combatant and the the bystander. And we've seen that in Gaza. I mean, Israel says we have to kill everyone because they're sheltering them. And because they have the firepower to do that, so we see 42,000 people dead. This is a whole new ball game in terms of the ethics of warfare. The idea of a just war, I think, goes out the window. And Lex Innocentium is saying, no, we have to see that the innocents are protected. And so anyway, we discussed all that. It's quite interesting. We heard back from peace builders in Africa, which in the Sudan has got a terrible conflict that's raging. Again, innocents are caught up, people that die and that are made homeless, and famine, and illness and so on. This is why war should be immoral, but also illegal. And we talked about how I still want to see the European Union create a mediation service. I think we should use our intellectual capital here in Europe, including Britain, and try and mediate conflicts around the world. So that's some of what we discussed, but you can watch the whole thing. So that's very exciting. And next, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be giving a talk on the 27th of November to an event organised from Edinburgh by my colleague Neil Walker, who runs the Interfaith Centre in Edinburgh, Scotland. We're talking about education in Palestine. It's been. I'm simply moderating it. The main lecturer is a professor at the University of Edinburgh, who is an educational expert on Palestine, and a lot of its infrastructure has been blown up in Gaza, universities, students, schools. I mean, this I regard as educide and as a line that should never ever be crossed. I do not understand how Israelis can self-justify this attack on educational infrastructure. And of course they can say, well, Hamas are hiding in the basements, but I don't accept that argument because they're killing school children and university students. What the answer is? Well, the answer has to be non-violence and peace. The answer has to be a peace treaty between Israel and Palestine in which this kind of violence doesn't happen. But how we get there from where we are now, I don't know. I mean, I've been to Bethlehem, I've been to Palestinian academic institutes, I've been to East Jerusalem, where the university there is Palestinian Centre for Higher Education and University. How can we get Israeli academics and Palestinian academics to have conversations that normalise their relationships? At the moment, it's complete and absolute demonisation. So that's what we'll be talking about. And if you're free to join us on the 27th of November, please do. It's at 7 o'clock UK time. I can send you the link. And then I've also been asked to give a talk at the University of Kashmir in northern India on the 21st of November. I'll be talking about whether there's any need for academia anymore in the world of AI. You can get instant answers to everything. Why bother with scholarship? So I'm going to be talking about, no, what about HI and DI, human intelligence and divine intelligence? I will be arguing that there's still a need for academics, still a need for joined up thinking, and that AI isn't the answer to our problems. It can be an adjunct to help, but if we just rely on that, I think the world is, impoverished. So that'll be fun. It's coming from the University of Kashmir in Srinagar. So, yes. Oh, and a little bit of news announcement. So I'm going to become the new librarian here in Betet, which is fun. It's just a little village, but we do have a little library, which is such a good thing. It's typical of France. They value culture, and they have little libraries in their towns and villages, big ones in the towns. So, and our current librarian is moving off to Brittany, so there was no one to take over. And I volunteered because I love books, and also I'll have to be taking books into the local French school for the school kids to get in the habit of reading. So handing on the torch of the love of learning to the next generation has always been my passion. So that's good news. And so if you come to Betet, do call in and visit me in the library there. Okay, well, we'll finish there. Let's move on to the much more important business of the periodic table and see where we are. Yes.
Primal Korean shamanism. Is number 7.
Okay. That's interesting. Okay, I thought I'm going to do... Oh dear, so exciting. Yeah, I'm going to do Mithraism and Zervanism, number 120, which is a Persian religion. I mentioned it a bit in my earlier talk, but I want to revisit that. So let's start with your one, Korean shamanism. Number 7, right?
Yes, because maybe we are not too far from Siberia. It's not so close, but...
Yes. Sure. There are similarities, certainly. So look, I got interested in this when I was working at the Institute of Education And I'd already been interested and fascinated by shamanism, and read Eliada's book on it, and I was giving talks at the University of London. But I met a girl whose father was one of Korea's experts on shamanism, and she told me, and I looked up his writings. I never met him. And it's a really big thing in Korea. I hadn't realised. It's still living, especially with women. It's the Korean women who are the shamans. And we would say they just channel. So in America, you know, virtually every other person is a channeler of some kind. Well, it's been that way in Korea for the last thousands of years. And they have, you know, to go to the home of a shamaness for a session, like a reading, is quite a big thing in Korean culture and society. And this, by the way, is only in the south. In the north, they have to keep quiet if they are still practicing shamanism, which they are, some of them. They're not allowed to do it publicly, officially, by the communist system. But in the south of Korea, it's thought there are about 5 million people that swear by shamanism as their go-to aid and help. And they consult them. So that's, you know, they also are there for spiritual healing, so that the shamanic healers have themselves undergone some kind of a crisis. Usually they've got interested in all this because they had an illness that they recovered from, or a crisis of faith or something. And then that gives them the strength and the power to do healing for the community. They themselves will be initiated as a shaman after their own spiritual journey. I mean, anybody can be chosen by the spirit world. It's not like my father was, so I am. It's the spirit can choose you according to its own set of priorities.
You speak in the Korean culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have books on this, but I'm just synthesizing down. There's one particular tradition called the Cheondogyo, which we could call a new religious movement in Korea, which is like shamanism in a slightly more religious dressing. It's a modern religious cult based on shamanism, but also the search for social and divine justice and peace. So this is quite interesting. They believe that faith should be united to science. And I mean, Korea is pretty good at making stuff, technology and electronics and things. And, you know, you'll find people who follow this path working in all those industries, but also then at weekends going to consult their local shamaness about, you know, the future of the world or whatever. There's a love of nature as part of this tradition, a love of the countryside, a support for farming people, and a kindness to animals, which is part of our showing reverence for deity. So our job as humans is to mediate between the divine world of the gods and nature, and the spirit worlds. And we can't all specialise in that, so that's why we have specialists, experts, shamans, shamanesses. And we should show respect for these shamans and elders. And it also is part of a thing in Korean culture, you respect women, because they often are much more in touch with spirit. And I think in my own life I would bear that out. You know, I've known some amazing women, probably shamanesses, who've taught me a great deal. Just as Diotima taught Socrates the nature of love in the Platonic corpus, it was a woman that initiated Socrates. And it's true in, you know, other traditions. Often it's the women that are the spirit holders, if you want. So it's a big thing in Korea. I just wish that I have friends in South Korea who I'm in touch with, and I just wish that North Korea wasn't going slightly so crazy and sending troops to Ukraine. I mean, is it wanting to declare war on Europe? I mean, is it so embedded with Putinism that it's never accepted the democratization of communism. It got stuck in a Stalinist bubble in which they've never forgiven Gorbachev for, trying to reform the USSR, and they still believe that Stalin had the truth and the light. They never even accepted Khrushchev. So this is a problem intellectually, and of course the people of South Korea don't buy into that. So I did ask my friend in South Korea what we could do in the way of healing this split, which is, when I nursed in hospitals in Canada, I nursed Canadian Army veterans who'd been in the Korean War. I also met, at a talk I went to in South Korea, I met the retired General Alexander Haig, who was an American defense minister for Reagan, and he'd fought in the Korean War. And it was him that rescued the chap who, Reverend Moon, who went on to found a branch of the Universalist Church, a very famous South Korean, a Christian ecumenical thinker. He tried to reconcile Christianity with Confucian and with Korean thought. And a few years ago, they were on every street in Western cities, we call them Moonies, trying to promote his thinking. But, it was quite important. And this guy, Al Haig, led the detachment that rescued him from a prison in Korea, where he would have been killed. I didn't know that till I actually heard him say that at this talk. He was long retired, but anyway, that was my visit to South Korea, and it's a very rich and fascinating culture, amazing place. And the other thing I remember very much was the tour we had around the old city of Seoul, and how these old houses have been left from medieval times. They're really beautiful. And the Korean royal family that ran from there invented an alphabet. So the Koreans were very advanced people very early on. That alphabet came in about 1400. And they were sort of mediating between Japan and Chinese culture. A lot of them were Buddhist, but they also kept this pagan or shamanic element to their culture. So, yes, let's hear more about the peace message of Korea, because I don't believe North Korea sending troops to Ukraine represents the real soul of Korean culture. They would be surely trying to mediate and respectfully heal this split. And I think it's totally wrong of Russia to be, egging this up and making it worse. By the way, let me just say, on the matter of political parties, there are no rival political parties allowed in some cultures. I've been researching this week about democracy and the funding of political parties. If you're going to have a multi-party system, state-funded, you need more than one party. But in China, there's only one party.
Yes, of course.
And in North Korea too, there's only one party. In Saudi Arabia, there's only one party. And in Swaziland, another absolute monarchy, a little landlocked part of South Africa, also just one party. So I think gradually we have to try and persuade the rest of the world that a multi-party system is the least worst of the options, because at least they get to take turns, and these mono-party systems like North Korea have to be somehow persuaded to adopt a more democratic procedure, and that's why I think Putin and North Korea have become allies, because they adhere to this same authoritarian ideology. Well, we don't in France. We believe in actual democracy, as we do also in other countries in the European Union and Canada and the Commonwealth generally and the UK. So I think so that's also a problem. And a final thought. In Korean shamanism, there are many gods and goddesses, and you would consult different deities to channel their wisdom for particular problems. This was agreed in the classical traditions of Greece and Rome. there was a sort of polytheistic pantheism. Same in Druidry, in the Gallic Celtic world. That to me seems just common sense. But I've been listening to Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologica this week in detail. It's 84 hours listening time and I'm getting through it. He's too monocentrist to me. His God is always one, and that brings absolute power to that one deity. And therefore that brings absolute power to the institution that professes to speak on behalf of that deity, which in Aquinas' case was the Roman Catholic Church. And then that gives them the right to persecute, punish and burn heretics if you have a deviant theology. And this, I think, is dangerous. And I'm determined, if I live long enough, to do a detailed critique of Aquinas' Summa Theologica, because I think he confused us all with this absolute monotheism. The wisdom of the Druids and the Korean shamans is a polytheistic, tolerant, pluralistic faith. Nobody knows the absolute. We're all little droplets of the absolute, as my friend Sir George Trevelyan used to say. Droplets of God. But nobody is the sum total of that absolute. And therefore we have to be humble and tolerant with each other. Maybe you follow a different God to me or a different goddess. That's fine. The world's very big. And so I'm just saying that that's the other reason in these mono-party states they follow one ideology, one path, be it Marxism or whatever. Or in the case of Saudi Arabia, it's a particularly intolerant form of Islam. In the case of Netanyahu's Israel, it's Judaism. I would like to move to a pluralistic world where in every country in the world there's a plurality of faiths. I'd like my periodic table to be in every school and every university worldwide, and for us to become truly intellectually and spiritually literate for the first time. We're not. This planet is monoliterate. In large parts of the world, you only know the contents of one box. That, I think, until that changes and we all become pluralistically literate, we're going to have more of these wars. Unity wars, because the different unity faiths are fighting each other for who's the absolute unity. It's a paradox. Okay, that's that one. Any questions?
It's not a question, it's a philosophic religious debate.
Sure.
But we may go on, because when you speak about Thomas d'Aquino,
Yeah.
I found that Christianity is a wonderful religion because it gives us direct access to the Father, and if we don't want that's one thing I didn't understand in the Christian religion. Maybe you can give some light, because why I do not understand why people they pray Mary or they pray Jesus. Why? Jesus showed us that he was in contact with his Father directly. He said, "Don't have guru, don't have master, don't call me master." But it's. I like this idea to go directly. Of course, there are still a lot of mystery because this Father, as is one, I cannot say nothing about him. But.
There's a huge lot of questions.
Yeah, yes, that's why
Sure.
I say.
Thank
But
you.
it's only a remark about feeling about what you said about Thomas Aquino.
Thank you, yes. Well, I'll let you know, I'll respond to that when I finish the commentary, when I finish the whole Summa Theologica.
Please.
All I would say is that, I don't know if I've shared this story before, but when I was in Naples, I spent a day in the library of the University of Naples reading, as one does. And I wanted to go to Naples because, A, it's the home of Vico, the great Italian philosopher from the 17th century, and also it's the home of Thomas Aquinas. He was a student at the University of Naples. So I wanted to pay homage, right? And as I was sitting in the library, I was reading about his life story. And I discovered that there was a fatal moment when he was praying in a church in Naples. He'd been there for the mass, there'd been a sermon, the whole thing, and he stayed behind. So everyone else had left the church. He was, I think, prostrate at the front, just talking to God, going straight to the Father, as you would say. But he didn't know this, but one of his students was hiding in the back, in the pews in the church, and watched as he levitated, saw him rising up, right? I don't know if he was like lying down or sitting, but and the guy swore he saw it, him levitating. It was one of the things that they put forward when he was made a saint. You have to prove it. Anyway, I was reading that in the library and I was thinking, that's cool, that's interesting, I didn't know that before. Anyway, and then I left the library and I went walking back to the centre of town, back to my hostel. And as I passed, I saw this sign, a gate, saying the Dominican Church of Naples. It's an old medieval church, and that was the place where that incident happened. It was actually there in front of me, a good synchronicity, because I just read about the incident and there was the church. I didn't have time to go in because it was locked, the gate. By then it was evening. Oh. But, so that was a sign, And the thing is that I think it was at that incident Aquinas decided that he'd stop writing Summa Theologica because he couldn't say it all. He realised that truth is beyond discursive intellect, and he stopped. So, I'm going to finish the whole book, and I'll see where he stopped, and if it's possible, I'll carry on a bit. But my approach will be slightly different, because obviously in being a knowledge, I've explained the plurality of beings and the plurality of knowledge. There's the best bit so far of Summa Theologica is when Aquinas talks about knowledge and God. There's a superb bit where he asks, what is the knowledge of God? And is it multiple? Like, does God have knowledge of all our interior states at once? How can God possibly know about the innermost workings of a Korean shaman and a Catholic theologian and a Buddhist all at the same time? He's asking those kind of questions. So I will come back to that in the future. Yes. Okay, now I'm going to do my one, which is Mithras. And this is number 120 on the periodic table. It's one of three that are clustered together because they're relating to ancient Persian religions. So on the periodic table, these Persian ones are important. And they're often not studied or taught much. They include Zoroastrianism, 122, Manichaeanism and Mazdakism, 121, and then Mithraism and Zervanism, 120. I've put a figure of about 50,000 people that follow these paths, even to this day. It's possible. And then there's another more recent Persian tradition, the Ilm-i-Khnum, which is another sort of more up-to-date form of this. So the background to this is this Zoroastrian idea, this cosmic struggle between good and evil. And we discussed this when we had Roisin here, and she asked about Zoroastrianism. So I'm not going to repeat all of that. The point is that there is this struggle between good and evil, and it was believed by the followers of Mithras that he is the helper who's going to help the forces of good win. So he's like the spiritual Seoshant. Seoshant was the Zoroastrian word for the saviour or Messiah, and this idea was given to the Jewish people. And it was the root of Christianity. So you're talking about, what's the origin of Christianity? It comes back here. Now, how does Mithras do this? What does he do? Well, his mysteries are very secret. It was like a Freemasonic initiation. You're not allowed to speak of these mysteries unless you've been initiated. And it took place in underground caverns called Mithraea, which are found, temples of Mithras, found all over Persia and the Roman Empire, in the city of London, and also in all over France, Gaul, Italy. And there's one in Bordeaux, a very big one, because Bordeaux was an important trading centre in the Roman Empire days. And these Mithraeums were things you could go to if you were wandering from Italy, say, visiting Bordeaux to buy a huge shipment of wine or something. You would then go and do the initiatory thing in the Mithraeum. And it was a sort of international, a Freemasonry essentially, active in the times of the Roman Empire. And the one in Bordeaux has been reconstructed in the Museum of Bordeaux, which is worth going to. It's huge. They've used the actual stones that archaeologists dug up, and they've rebuilt the Mithraeum, showing what it was like. And it's worth a trip to Bordeaux. And there's a map on the wall of all the other Mithraea discovered in the Roman Empire, and there's hundreds of them. They were in the Rhine Valley, Cologne. They were in Britannia as far as Hadrian's Wall. All over Italy. Ostia had a big one. Here in France, most big cities had them, and in Spain as well. So it was a kind of ritual reenactment of the struggle between good and evil. Mithras is the god of light and truth, and his name comes from a root meaning a covenant. Truth makes itself available to us as his grace, majesty and power. He is the leading deity. He was a god, right, guiding the armies of Ahura Mazda as we're summoned to struggle in his jihad or crusade for the victory of light and truth. And so different aspects of this were shared with the initiates as they went through the grades. His birthday was the 25th of December. And in time, this became associated with the birthday of Christ, who probably wasn't born on the 25th of December. But my speculation is that St. Paul began his life not only as a Jewish sage, but also an initiate of Mithras. I've said this in the Tarot of the Gods, where I talk about Mithras. There's a big selection. I'm pretty sure my instinct on that is correct, because Tarsus, where Paul came from, was a region rich with Mithraic traces. It had a Stoic philosophy school. And Paul was a restless intellect wanting truth, so he would have taken the initiations into Mithras. Just like in 18th century France, you would do the Freemasonic initiations to find out what's going on here. I think what Paul decided was that Jesus was the human embodiment of Mithras. And I think he conflated the two. Did Christ think that? It's possible. Who do we know? What do we know? Was Christ aware of the Mithraic mysteries? I believe so, yes, because he was always healing Roman centurions and they were always followers of Mithras, right? So what do you think they talked about later? And also the kingdom of Pontus and North Turkey and all around there was a Mithraic seedbed. There was a great king of one of those regions who'd founded a huge, like a mausoleum for himself on a great hill, dedicated to Mithras. He was from, and all the kings were called Mithridates. So Mithras was known in the culture. So of course, when